My son put his hand on me, in my own house, and I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fight back. I didn't even look him in the eye. But the next evening, when he walked into my dining room, thinking I'd accepted his disrespect, he froze dead in his tracks when he saw who was sitting across from me at the Thanksgiving table. I was standing at the head of the table, adjusting the good china, the set my wife and I bought for our 25th anniversary. Candles were lit. Napkins folded just so. When Tony walked in with that swagger of his, like he still owned the air in this house, he hadn't even noticed my swollen eye. He was too busy smelling the turkey. He sat down without waiting for grace, grabbed a roll, and started talking about how maybe now I'd learn to stay in my place. But the words died in his throat when the front door opened behind him. He turned, and the color drained from his face like water down a sink. Pastor Raymond stood in the doorway. Officer Elise Carter was behind him in plain clothes. And my brother Samuel, 6'3" and steady as a mountain, stepped in last and closed the door with a soft click. The roll fell from Tony's hand and hit the floor. He knew in that moment that my silence the night before hadn't been weakness. It had been a decision. And Thanksgiving dinner wasn't a peace offering, it was a reckoning. But for you to understand how we got to this table that felt more like a courtroom than a holiday, let me introduce myself properly. My name is Kevin Vaughn. I'm 71 years old, a widower, and I live in the same brick house in Detroit where I raised my family. The kind of neighborhood where people still wave from their porches and remember your wife's name 10 years after she's gone. I spent 40 years as an electrician, woke up early, came home tired, never complained. I raised my son with discipline and love, the way my father raised me. After my Margaret passed, I thought Tony and I would lean on each other. Until about 24 hours ago, I didn't know the boy I raised had become the man I feared. It all fell apart the night before Thanksgiving. Around 11 p.m., I was in the kitchen, listening to the late news on low, peeling potatoes for the next day's dinner. The rain was coming down hard, tapping against the windows like nervous fingers. Then I heard Tony's truck pull up too fast, tires skidding on the wet driveway. The front door banged open. He didn't call out. He just stomped through the house, reeking of whiskey and failure. I stayed quiet, hoping he'd go upstairs, but he found me. He stood in the kitchen doorway, chest heaving, eyes red-rimmed, and then he started in saying I never believed in him, that I loved this house more than I loved him, that everything wrong in his life traced back to me. I stood up slowly. Son, I said, go sleep it off. We'll talk tomorrow. That was the trigger. A 8-year-old man, the boy I taught to throw a football, the boy whose bloody knees I bandaged, the boy I walked to his first day of school, came at me like I was a stranger. He grabbed my shirt and shoved me into the counter. Before I could steady myself, his fist connected with my eye. The world went white, then black at the edges. I hit the floor. He stood over me, breathing hard, and said something I'll never forget. Maybe now you'll remember who runs this house. Then he walked away, went upstairs, fell into bed like nothing happened. I lay there on that cold kitchen floor for a long time. The rain kept falling. The news anchor kept talking. And somewhere between the pain in my eye and the ache in my chest, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I wouldn't serve fear. I'd serve dinner and justice. I pulled myself up off that floor around midnight. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. I walked to the bathroom, slow and careful like a man twice my age, and looked in the mirror. The swelling had already started purple and angry around my left eye. By morning, it would be worse. I thought about calling 911. The phone was right there on the counter. 3 little numbers, and this would all be someone else's problem. But I didn't pick it up. See, I knew what would happen. Squad cars in my driveway, neighbors peeking through curtains, Tony hauled off in handcuffs, screaming that I'd betrayed him. And then what? He'd make bail. He'd come back angrier. And next time, it might not be just a black eye. No. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it my way, on my terms, in my house. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd taught Tony to do his homework, where Margaret and I used to drink coffee on Sunday mornings, and I pulled out an old notepad. The pen felt heavy in my hand, but I wrote 3 names. Pastor Raymond. Raymond had known our family for 30 years. He'd officiated Margaret's funeral. He'd watched Tony grow from a gap-toothed kid in the church choir to a decorated soldier to whatever he was now. If anyone could speak to Tony's soul, it was Raymond. He was my moral witness. Officer Elise Carter. Elise grew up 4 houses down. Used to sell lemonade on the corner with Tony when they were 10 years old. Now she wore a badge. She'd been the one to respond when Tony got into that bar fight last spring, the one he swore wasn't his fault. She knew his history. She knew what he was becoming. She was my legal witness. Samuel, my younger brother, 68 years old, and still built like he could lift the back end of a truck. Samuel never said much, but when he stood beside you, you felt it. He'd told me 2 Christmases ago that something was wrong with Tony, that I should be careful. I didn't listen then. I was listening now. He was my blood witness. I stared at those 3 names for a long time. 2 years. That's how long I'd been tiptoeing through my own house. 2 years of walking on eggshells, of apologizing for things that weren't my fault, of watching my son disappear into bottles and bitterness after his divorce and his discharge. I told myself he was hurting. I told myself he'd get better. I told myself a father doesn't give up on his child. But here's the truth I couldn't say out loud until that night. Sitting alone with a swollen eye and a broken heart, I was scared of my own child, and that shame was heavier than any punch he could throw. I picked up the phone. It was almost 1 a.m. But I dialed anyway. Raymond, it's Kevin. I need you at my house tomorrow evening. 6 o'clock sharp. It's about Tony. A pause. Then, I'll be there. 2 more calls. Same message, same quiet understanding. By the time I hung up, the rain had stopped. And for the first time in 2 years, so had my fear. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tony standing over me. Fist raised. Face twisted into someone I didn't recognize. So I cooked instead. By 5 a.m., I was in the kitchen, pulling out Margaret's old roasting pan. The turkey had been thawing in the fridge for 3 days. I'd planned this dinner weeks ago, back when I still believed the holiday might fix something between us. Now, it would serve a different purpose. I moved through the motions like a man preparing for church. Seasoned the bird with rosemary and thyme, peeled potatoes until my fingers pruned, stirred the gravy low and slow, the way my mother taught me. Every action deliberate, every step part of the plan. Around noon, I set the table. I pulled out the good china, the set with the gold trim that Margaret saved for special occasions. I polished each glass until it gleamed. Folded the napkins into neat triangles, crisp as courtroom documents. Lit 2 candles and placed them at the center, tall and steady. This wasn't just Thanksgiving dinner. This was a trial. And I was setting the courtroom. My hands trembled as I laid out the silverware. Not from fear this time, from grief. I kept seeing flashes of the boy Tony used to be. 8 years old, helping me rake leaves in the backyard, laughing when he jumped into the pile. 18. Standing proud in his army uniform the day he shipped out. 25. Dancing with his bride at his wedding, spinning her until she was dizzy with joy. Where did that boy go? I caught my reflection in the dining room window and stopped. The bruise around my eye had deepened overnight, purple fading to black at the edges, swollen halfway shut. I looked like I'd lost a fight. And I suppose I had, just not the kind anyone could see from the outside. I'd been losing for 2 years. The little things first. Tony snapping at me over breakfast, slamming doors when I asked simple questions. Then, the bigger things. Holes punched in walls. Dishes shattered against the floor. That night he grabbed my arm so hard it bruised, then acted the next morning like nothing happened. I kept forgiving, kept excusing, kept telling myself it was the alcohol, the divorce, the military discharge that broke something inside him. But last night, he broke something inside me too. I pulled out 1 more chair and placed it at the head of the table. Not my usual seat. Not Tony's either. This chair was for Pastor Raymond, the man who would sit in judgment tonight, who would look my son in the eye and call him to account. I stepped back and surveyed the room. Everything was ready. Now I just had to wait. Upstairs, I heard Tony's bedroom door creak open. Heavy footsteps moved toward the bathroom. The water ran. He was awake, and he had no idea what was coming. The bathroom door slammed. More footsteps, then silence. I stood in the kitchen, drying my hands on a dishcloth, listening to the house breathe. The clock on the wall read 5:42 p. Tony came down the stairs, slow and heavy, each step groaning under his weight. I heard him pause in the hallway, probably checking himself in the mirror, running a hand through his hair like he used to before a date. Like today was just another day. When he walked into the dining room, he still smelled faintly of last night's whiskey. It clung to him like a second skin. He'd thrown on a wrinkled t-shirt and jeans, hadn't bothered to shave. His eyes swept over the table, the china, the candles, the turkey glistening under the overhead light, and a smirk crawled across his face. Well, he said, pulling out a chair. Didn't know you were going to celebrate being wrong. I said nothing. He sat down without waiting for grace, without waiting for me. Reached across the table and tore off a piece of turkey with his bare hands. Chewed with his mouth open, watching me the whole time like he was daring me to say something. This is nice, Pop. He gestured at the spread with a greasy finger. Real nice. Maybe you're finally starting to understand how things work around here. I stood at the edge of the room, arms folded, and let him talk. See? That's all I wanted. He leaned back in his chair, legs spread wide, like he owned the room. A little respect, a little acknowledgement that this is my house too. You act like I'm some kind of guest, but I'm your son, your only son. And maybe, he pointed at me with a turkey leg, maybe now you'll start listening when I tell you something. He hadn't mentioned my eye, hadn't even glanced at the swelling, the purple bruise that covered half my face. It was like it didn't exist, like I didn't exist except as an audience for his performance. I watched him eat, watched him brag, watched him convince himself that last night's violence had purchased my silence, my compliance, my surrender. He was wrong. My silence wasn't submission, it was patience. You gonna sit down or what? Tony asked, mouth full of stuffing. Food's getting cold. I checked the clock. 5:58 p.m. In a minute, I said. He shrugged and kept eating, oblivious, happy, even. He thought he'd won. Thought the fancy dinner meant I'd accepted my place beneath him. Thought the bruise on my face was a receipt for his authority. The doorbell rang. Tony froze, fork halfway to his mouth. His eyes cut to the front door, then back to me. Who's that? He asked. I didn't answer. I just walked to the door, steady and slow, and wrapped my hand around the knob. Pop, who the hell is that? I opened the door. Pastor Raymond stood on my porch, dressed in his Sunday black, Bible tucked under one arm. Behind him, Officer Elise Carter wore plain clothes, jeans, a blazer, but her badge hung from her belt, catching the porch light. And beside her, my brother Samuel filled the doorway like a wall, arms crossed, face unreadable. Evening, Kevin, Raymond said softly. His eyes found my bruise and stayed there for a long moment. Then he nodded. We're here. I stepped aside and let them in. Tony was already on his feet when we entered the dining room. Chair knocked back, napkin still tucked into his collar like a child. His face had gone pale, not white, but gray, like old ash. The confidence from 30 seconds ago had evaporated. Pop? His voice cracked. What is this? What's going on? Nobody answered. Raymond walked past him and took the chair at the head of the table, the one I'd set there this morning. The chair that wasn't for Tony or me. He sat down slowly, set his Bible on the table, and folded his hands. Elise moved to the corner of the room, quiet and watchful. Samuel stood behind me, close enough that I could feel his presence like a steadying hand. Sit down, Tony, Raymond said. Tony didn't move. I don't understand. This is Thanksgiving. This is family. Sit down. The command in Raymond's voice was something I hadn't heard since his fire and brimstone days, back when he'd preached so hard the windows rattled. Tony sat. Raymond looked at him the way a judge looks at a defendant. Tony, I've known you since you were 7 years old. I watched you memorize scripture for the youth competition. I wrote you a recommendation letter for the army. I prayed for you every single day you were deployed. He paused. And I've been praying for your father every single day since you came back. Tony's jaw tightened. Pastor, whatever he told you, he didn't have to tell me anything. Elise stepped forward, voice flat and professional. I ran your name this morning. Tony. 2 noise complaints in the last 6 months, a bar fight in April where you broke a man's nose, and a pending warrant for failure to appear on a drunk and disorderly charge. She tilted her head. You've been busy. Those are mistakes. That's not. Tony looked around the room, desperate. Pop, tell them this is a misunderstanding. I stepped forward. For 2 years, I'd swallowed my words, choked on them, let them rot in my chest because I was afraid of what would happen if I spoke. Not anymore. I raised a son, I said, my voice steady. I taught him right from wrong. I held him when he cried and cheered when he succeeded. I gave him everything I had. I pointed at my eye, swollen, purple, undeniable. I didn't raise a bully. And I sure as hell didn't raise a man who hits his own father. Tony's face crumbled. The arrogance, the excuses, the denial, it all cracked like cheap plaster. And, for the first time, he had nothing to say. The silence hung in the room like smoke. Tony's eyes darted between the faces surrounding him. Raymond's steady judgment. Elise's cold patience. Samuel's immovable presence. Then, they landed on me. And for a moment, just a flicker, I saw the little boy I used to carry on my shoulders. Pop, his voice broke. Pop, please. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them we had too much to drink, and things got out of hand. That's all it was. I didn't move. Come on. He was begging now. Hands spread open on the table. This is family business. We don't need outsiders in our house. We can work this out ourselves. We always do. There it was. The same script he'd used 100 times before. The apologies that weren't apologies. The promises that lasted until the next bottle. The manipulation dressed up as love. I used to fall for it. Every single time. Not tonight. Tony, I said, and my voice came out quieter than I expected. Calmer. You are my son. You will always be my son. I loved you before you took your first breath, and I'll love you until I take my last. His shoulders relaxed, just slightly. He thought he'd won again. But I won't be your victim. Not anymore. The words hit him like a slap. His face twisted confusion, then anger, then something raw and desperate underneath. You're really gonna do this? He stood up fast, chair screeching against the floor. You're gonna let them arrest your own son on Thanksgiving? In front of these people? He pointed at Raymond. In front of your pastor? Sit down, Tony, Elise said, stepping forward. No. He spun toward her, fists clenched. This is my father's house. You can't just... Anthony Vaughn. Her voice cut through his rage like a blade. You're under arrest for domestic assault. You have the right to remain silent. She pulled the cuffs from her belt. Tony lunged not at her, but toward me. Samuel moved faster than I thought possible for a man his age, stepping between us like a shield. Tony bounced off his chest and stumbled backward. Don't, Samuel said. One word. That's all it took. Tony crumpled. Not physically, he was still standing, but something inside him collapsed. His shoulders shook. His breath came in ragged gasps. And then, for the first time since his mother's funeral, my son began to cry. I'm sorry, he sobbed, as Elise guided his wrists behind his back. Pop, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean I never wanted. The cuffs clicked shut. The candlelight flickered. Elise led him toward the door. He looked back once, face wet with tears, mouth still forming apologies. I couldn't hear anymore. Then he was gone. The front door closed with a soft click. And I broke. Samuel caught me before I hit the floor. I buried my face in my brother's chest and sobbed for Tony. For Margaret. For the 2 years I'd lost to fear. And for the father I'd finally become again. The weeks after Thanksgiving moved like molasses, in winter slow, thick, heavy. Samuel stayed with me that first night. Raymond came by the next morning with coffee and silence, which was exactly what I needed. Elise called to let me know Tony had been processed and was being held until his arraignment. I thanked her and hung up before my voice could break again. I heard things. Secondhand mostly. Tony's first few days in county jail were bad. He raged. Screamed that I'd betrayed him, threw his food tray against the wall, and earned himself 2 extra days in solitary. The anger was a mask. Of course I knew that now. Underneath it was the same scared boy who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms. But knowing that didn't make it hurt less. The court mandate came down in mid-December. 6 months probation. Weekly anger management sessions. Mandatory addiction counseling. The judge made it clear. 1 more incident, and he'd serve real time. I didn't visit him. Not yet. Instead, I focused on my own rebuilding. First, the locks. Samuel helped me install new deadbolts on the front and back doors. It felt strange, fortifying my home against my own son, but every click of those locks reminded me I had a right to feel safe in my own house. Then, therapy. Pastor Raymond recommended a counselor at the community center, a woman named Dr. Elaine, who specialized in family trauma. I sat in her office that first day, twisting my hat in my hands, feeling foolish. A 71-year-old man talking about his feelings. But she didn't judge. She just listened. And slowly, I started to unpack the guilt and shame I'd been carrying like stones in my pockets. I reconnected with the neighborhood too. Started attending Sunday dinners at Raymond's again. Let Mrs. Patterson from 2 doors down bring me her famous sweet potato pie. Sat on my porch in the evenings and waved at folks walking by, something I hadn't done in 2 years. Life, cautiously, began again. Then the letter came. It arrived on a Tuesday in early February, my name written in Tony's handwriting on the envelope. I stared at it for an hour before I opened it. 4 pages, front and back. He wrote about his anger, where it came from, how it had festered since the divorce and the discharge. He wrote about the alcohol, how it numbed the pain until it didn't, and then it just made everything worse. He wrote about that night in the kitchen, every detail, unflinching. And then he wrote this. That punch showed me who I'd become. A man I don't recognize. A man I hate. I've spent my whole life running from pain, and I ended up causing it to the one person who never gave up on me. Your silence that night saved my life, Pop. I know that now. I folded the letter and held it against my chest. Hope is a fragile thing. But, for the first time, I let myself feel it. We met in April, 4 months after Thanksgiving. The mediator's office was small and neutral, beige walls, fake plant in the corner, 2 chairs facing each other with a low table between them. Dr. Elaine had helped me prepare for this moment, told me I didn't have to say yes to anything I wasn't ready for. Told me that forgiveness and boundaries could live in the same room. I believed her. But sitting there, waiting, my heart still pounded like a drum. The door opened, and Tony walked in. I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, too much weight. His clothes hung loose on his frame. The swagger was gone, replaced by something quieter, smaller. He moved like a man who'd finally stopped running and didn't quite know how to stand still. His eyes met mine, and I saw it immediately. Shame. Deep and unfiltered. He sat down across from me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, Tony leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees, and said the words I'd waited 2 years to hear. Pop, I'm sorry. No excuses, no explanations. I hurt you, he continued, voice cracking. I terrorized you in your own home. I made you afraid of me. And there's nothing I can say that makes that okay. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. but I'm asking for it anyway. Because you're my father, and I don't want to lose you." The room went quiet. The mediator sat still in the corner, giving us space. I looked at my son, this broken man who had once been a laughing boy catching fireflies in our backyard. The soldier who came home with medals and nightmares. The man who'd lost his wife, his career, and nearly his soul. I reached across the table and took his hand. "Tony," I said, "I forgive you." His shoulders shook, tears spilled down his cheeks. "But I need you to hear me," I continued, squeezing his hand. "The father who covered for you, who made excuses, who let you cross lines because he was afraid that man is gone. I had to let him go to save myself." Tony nodded, unable to speak. "You will not live in my house again, not ever. My home is my peace now, and I won't give that up. Not for anyone." I softened my grip. "But that doesn't mean we're done. It means we start over. Slowly. On new terms." He looked up at me, eyes red and swollen. "I'll take whatever you're willing to give." "Coffee," I said. "Saturday mornings. There's a diner on Maple Street. We can start there." A small, fragile smile crossed his face. "I'd like that." We sat there for a while longer. Two men learning how to be father and son again. Not the way we were, but the way we needed to be. That Thanksgiving, I didn't just serve dinner. I served justice. And in the end, it saved us both.